like, and subscribe. Let's get straight to it. Evil wants to make this a race war. This is not a race war. This is a war of good versus evil. Truth versus lies. Greed versus humanity. I almost fell for the game. And I was looking at this as white versus black. And it's evil, and it's easy to do this because when we look at the Civil War, it looks like a race war because the result of the Civil War was the freedom of black people. The result of the Civil War was the freedom of black people. So we can call it a race war because the only resulting factor that changed after the Civil War was the freedom of black people. And if we realize that there is but one human race, then it was a battle of good versus evil. Freedom to all human beings. It can be defined as a battle between the haves and the have-nots. The rich slave masters versus the poor slaves. We have to realize, when was white supremacy created? When was it created? When was it manufactured as a tool for the rich to divide and subject the have-nots? This is an important date in the history of humanity because the world in which we live was not always divided into black and white. White supremacy is simply a plutocratic money grab in which not all Caucasians are a part of. It is very hard for me not to call what exists today a race war based on the color of a person's skin. See, you really can't even call it a race war. You really can't call it a race war because not all Caucasians are evil. Not all Caucasians believe in the separation of human beings. They don't all believe in that. In the Civil War, white people died for the freedom of their brothers and sisters of color. They fought and died. And it was together that we won this war. But when the South said, "We shall rise again," that was the Plutocrats putting words in the mouth of Southerners and creating white supremacy. And to further increase white supremacy, they had to whitewash history to make this, to create this invisible barrier between people of color, melanated people, and non-melanated people. They had to create this false barrier so that they can continue the exploitation and the colonization of the masses. Because when Italians first came to America, they were not considered white. When the Irish first came to America, they were not considered white, even though they had the complexion for the connection. And this complexion for the connection allowed them to cross over and be considered white. But they had to prove themselves worthy of being white. And to prove themselves worthy of being white, they had to exploit black people. And once they exploited black people, then they can cross over. Then the Irish and the Italians could cross over. But understand this, the true white supremacists were the English, because racism and white supremacy come from England. Because England was the group of whites who exploited people of color more than anyone else. They are the progeny of the Romans. They took over where the Romans took over, and the Greeks, in the exploitation of people of color. And they needed a dividing line to ensure that they could exploit people. They needed the working class. Because if you look at England, the kings and queens, they exploited, and the royalty, they called everybody else the commoners. And they exploited them. They weren't even allowed to hunt in the woods because the king owned everything. And this is why after centuries of beheading so-called nobility, eventually the English people, the commoners, won some type of equality. And that equality is the word white supremacy. Because the Plutocrats, the rich class, they needed the commoners to fight and exploit so that they could keep their wealth. See, the battle is between good and evil. The battle is between good and evil. Because not all Caucasians are interested in the exploitation and colonization of their fellow human beings. So you're always going to have, so you can't call it a race war. Because you can call it a racial division, a racial divide, but calling it a race war is wrong. I mean, the rabbit hole of deception is so deep, it's going to be hard for humanity to dig ourselves out of this dividing line. And even as we talk about reparations, which should be paid, because governments of racist countries have benefited from colonization and exploitation of people of color. The governments have benefited from it, and they have used those benefits to the advantage of the working class people that were once called commoners. There has to be some type of spiritual restitution and moral justice for the exploitation of people of color. As far as the way I see it, all things should be made equal. So the question of reparation is, how do we make all things equal? How do we bring about equality of income, equality of resources? This world, this planet, was given to all human beings. All human beings. And it is wrong to, in my opinion, punish people that have been deceived. It's wrong to punish people that have been deceived. And that makes the rabbit hole deep as deep can be. Racism is going to end in the world in order for the world to survive. But it will only end to a degree, because you are always going to have races. But the question is, can we have 90% non-racist people? Can we have 90% good and 10% evil? Then we can have a utopia where people are working together for the common good. Understand, a utopia is not perfection. Perfection is the light at the end of the tunnel that we must always strive for. Because the minute we stop striving for perfection, we fall back into our evil ways. So we must always strive for perfection. A utopia is to strive for perfection. But right now, humanity, we must understand that the battle is between good versus evil. And you cannot repeat the actions of evil and not be evil yourself. Africa cannot follow the blueprint of Caucasian civilization, which has caused the damage to the world in which we live in, beginning with the hole in the ozone layer, and global warming. We have got to come together as a people. And I cannot hold all Caucasians responsible for what Plutocrats have done, for the deception. But it's a really curious thing here, because of those Caucasians, who desire the unfair advantage that they received. But see, what we must have is to be our brother's keepers. And to be our brother's keepers, we have to put a limit on personal wealth. We have to put a limit on personal wealth. And we must provide all people with homes, houses, hospitalization, and those things that are necessary to survive. Period. Because scientists are not scientists because they want to make a certain amount of money. Real doctors are not real doctors because they want to make a certain amount of money. Real doctors are those who care about human beings. Real scientists are those who care about understanding the universe and expanding humankind throughout the universe. You see, money should not be a factor for what we do. We are spiritually curious about the world in which we live in. And that is what should take precedence. And we, as children, naturally want to care and help each other. But we have allowed satanic plutocrats who are nothing but evil and do because they cannot control their desires. And if they cannot control their monetary desires for greed, then they cannot control their sexual desires, their homosexual desires. You see, there's a saying, idle hands are the devil's workshop. And when you have people with so much money, the only thing they're looking to do is satisfy their greed. And their greed expands from money to sexuality, to wars, to more money, to incest, to keep the money in the family. They lose all. Greed causes the loss of human nature. And that's what we as human beings must understand and get in control of. Greed of any kind destroys human nature and devalues human beings. Greed of any kind destroys human nature, which causes the devaluation of human beings. With that, like and subscribe. I'll talk to you later. And we've got to figure this thing out. Because human beings are human beings. Even though Caucasians are 9% Neanderthals and black people are 100% Homo sapiens, we all have something to offer to human beings. Whether you want to call Neanderthals a subspecies, which they have called themselves, they are still human beings. We are human beings. The fact that we can integrate sexually and produce children proves that we are equal. A donkey and a horse will produce a mule, and a mule is sterile. That means it is wrong. But intermarriages between human beings that produce progeny, that's nature. That's nature. If it wasn't natural, then they would not produce children. So you can call Neanderthals, Homo sapiens, this, that, and the other, but the fact that we can breed and create life that can further create life is in accordance with nature. So all this stuff about not mixing with this race, not mixing with that race is BS. Because we know the more diversity in the human genome, the more advanced the human being. And this was a problem that Israelis had because they had become so, I guess, I'm not sure if the word is homogenized or what, but they had inbred with each other so long that they were cousins and sisters, and brother relatives intermarrying. They were relatives intermarrying, and that's a problem. We need diversity. We need diversity, and the less diversity we have, the more we are susceptible to becoming extinct. The more we are susceptible of becoming senile. We need diversity. We need diversity. It is our saving grace. It is our saving grace. With that, like and subscribe, and we can get into some more of this later on. But what we're calling a race war is really a war between good and evil. Like and subscribe. Have a nice day.